an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Parable of the Sower, chapters 4 through 6, commissioned by Danique Gonzalez. In these chapters, I'm really looking for some hope and not really finding it. Maybe that's the point, but I'm getting bummed out. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome, everybody. There's one person in the chat with me today, and doing this one as a morning broadcast, which I think is the first one that was ordered this way. This episode, the last episode of Parable of the Sower, I did a live read on camera. So once it came time to discuss the chapters, I had only just read them, and it hadn't completely sunk in yet. So this episode, I'm going to just start off recapping, especially since it's been a while, the first 3 chapters really quickly and revisiting some things that happen in them and discussing that, and then get into the next 3. So there were a couple things. I reread the first 3 chapters also, since it had been a while, to get myself prepared for this commission. And there were some things that I feel like I didn't really notice the first time. The first thing is that at one point when we're getting our very first introduction to Lauren's condition, the hyperempathy, she actually says, he's always pretended or perhaps believed that my hyperempathy syndrome was something I could shake off and forget about. The sharing isn't real, after all. It isn't some magic or ESP that allows me to share the pain or pleasure of other people. It's delusional. Even I admit that. So I don't think I really absorbed that the first time. And I had thought that her hyperempathy was a straight up superpower, basically. The kind of, thing that you get from radiation in comic books sort of thing. Because she says that her hyperempathy is a result of her mother abusing a certain drug when she was carrying her. And once I read that, it kind of gave me pause, because now I'm not entirely sure. She thinks that it's delusional. And I don't know, because she talks right after that about how her brother Keith used to pretend to be injured. He used red ink as fake blood to make me bleed. I still bled through the skin when I saw someone else bleeding when I was 11. That doesn't feel like it can possibly be delusional. You're having a physical, I guess one could say that you can have physical symptoms that are psychosomatic, sure. But that's the kind of thing that bleeding through the skin, that is something that human beings don't do. This isn't just oh, your psychosomaticism, is that a word, leads to you stuttering, or leads to pain in your leg, or leads to you can't hold a pen because your fingers see. Bleeding through your skin isn't a normal human ailment. So I'm really surprised that this is when I reread it, I highlighted that with the kind of fervor of just, wait, what? So I'm curious about that, and I'm not sure if we're going to get more. Obviously I think we're going to get more on this, but, I'm wondering, by get more, is she going to change her mind about that? Because I feel like the only reason that she's telling herself it's delusional is because that's a way preferable situation, isn't it? Don't we want to believe that something that doesn't do us any good in society, something like this, hyperempathy, that causes her constant pain, I guess we would want to believe that it's all in our head and maybe eventually will go away if we learn how to control it. Especially because of the detail followed up there was that once she got her period, she stopped bleeding with anyone, which I have no idea what those two things mean to each other. If it's the actual act of bleeding from her period that caused the other bleeding to like become controlled or what, or if the bleeding being symbolic of her maturity means that she began to control it. Because, you know, that's like a thing with a lot of books and stories, is that if you have magic, once you, like, it may be wildly out of your control as a child, but then once you go through puberty and you begin to grow up, it starts to become under your control. Or if you didn't even know you had magic going through puberty, suddenly that magic will begin to develop. So I'm not sure which way to take this, if it's the bleeding itself, if it's the symbolism, or if it's maybe a combo. But yeah, this just like really startled me on the reread. I don't know why I completely forgot or didn't notice it the first time. And then we have the chapter where she's discussing what her God is. And I highlighted this too because I didn't remember this. She talks about God is powerful, infinite, irresistible, inexorable, indifferent, and yet God is pliable, trickster, teacher, chaos, clay. God exists to be shaped. God is change. And she says a moment later, God can't be resisted or stopped, but can be shaped and focused. This means God is not to be prayed to. Prayers only help the person doing the praying, and then only if they strengthen and focus that person's resolve. If they're used that way, they can help in our only real relationship with God. They help us to shape God and to accept and work with the shapes that God imposes on us. God is power, and in the end, God prevails. But we can rig the game in our own favor if we understand that God exists to be shaped and will be shaped with or without our forethought, with or without our intent. That's a really interesting idea. That it's almost like she's saying God is more of just a force, but that our intentionality by praying doesn't cause God, like as a sentient human being, to sit up and change his mind and be like, oh, well, since you asked, I'll do this thing. It's more like there's a force coming at you and it was heading in this direction, and your prayer and your focus and your thought dug a ditch heading in another direction and redirected the force towards what you wanted with the intention of your mind. Which is a really cool idea, and I fucking like it. Like, I might subscribe to this idea. Because I'm not an atheist. I don't not believe in God. But I definitely don't believe in a sentient being watching us and making conscious decisions and that sort of thing. I think that there is some kind of energy out there that connects everything. And I believe that prayer... I've always believed that prayer could make a difference, but I didn't really believe it in the way that most people do. And this is a really good explanation for that. That prayer is simply you sitting down and using the power of your mind, which I think is a really underused resource. Like humanity, we treat the mind as... excuse me. We treat the mind as a computer. Ooh, reminder, right before minute 10, edit out my sneezing. But we treat the mind as a computer, as if it's just formulating ideas and working out like beginning and ending sorts of problems. That there is a super rationality to the brain that I think is comforting to believe, but does not cover it all. And there is so much evidence out there that, and I'm not going to get into like The Secret, because I think The Secret is victim blaming bullshit. So, but I do think that there's something to be said for positive thinking and visualization and that sort of thing. And not that it's a magic effect, not that thinking through something suddenly makes you like get what you want. Like, again, I'll bring up The Secret, where there's these wild claims made in that book that if you just think about getting checks in the mail, suddenly you'll start getting them. And they don't give any detail as to why or, you know, where that money's coming from or if you deserve it or not. It's just, oh, I thought it and it came. And I don't buy that one bit. But I do think that there is something about focus and really impressing upon your mind what it is you want or what it is that you're looking for and believe that I think makes you aware of what is around you in a distinct way that draws that thing to you because you have honed the awareness. So yeah, I don't know. I really like this, this concept, and it sort of makes me think of like something that I've been lately. And I think that I'm not alone in this, but I don't like to pretend it's a modern problem only, but it's definitely exacerbated by modern technology, is that it's hard these days to get focused on one thing. Our brains are constantly distracted. And while I'm not like straight up blaming technology and saying, oh, it's evil. No, obviously my entire job depends on technology. I love my phone. You know, I'm not saying that. But I am saying that I have noticed for myself on the days where I wake up, I get my planner out, I sit and write down what I want to accomplish today, make myself a schedule, and have a 5-minute meditation of just calming myself and focusing. Those are the days that go way better than the others. Every time, like without fail, every time. And I think using my mind and focus is changing how I approach my day. And if is that God? I don't know. But this explanation and the description of God as being something that is trying to teach you, that is a bit of a trickster, that can be just chaos and is going to come at you and happen unless you do anything, and push you in whatever direction. Even if you don't take control, you're going to be at this force's mercy in a way, I think is a really compelling idea. So, you know, you may as well sit down and pray and think it through because it's coming at you either way. So why not take advantage if you can versus just like letting it roll over you and being sort of a victim to it, a victim to whatever comes your way from it. So yeah, I like this whole idea. And I think she even uses like one of God's victims at some point. But so let's go on. We have, I'm going to go into chapter 4 now because those are the things that I just kind of wanted to recover from the first 3 chapters. And, you know, plot wise, obviously we have like the breakdown of society and the world. There's not a clear explanation given in terms of why this is all happening, except for that there is a huge drought, at least where they are. And I get the impression that because they are talking about LA and it being like sort of one of the closest cities, I'm not sure if they are also in California and LA is like the closest big city, or if they're somewhere like Arizona, you know, somewhere that's like the biggest city nearby. I feel like that's too far away, another state, because of the fact that nobody's using vehicles anymore. But I'm not positive. This whole, like, the way that these neighborhoods are set up is that there are people who have, like, no walls, and that's where you don't want to be, because you don't have any protection. You don't have any, like, sort of borders that define what your neighborhood is, and that seems important. That seems like the thing that sort of defines who's going to defend whom and stick up for whom and who's on whose side. So there's then the other communities that have low walls, and those walls are not great. They're built out of like piles of rubble and garbage and all like whatever they could find to pile up, essentially. So it's not a real wall. It's just like a hill of trash separating them from the completely unwalled towns. And then there's the city or the neighborhood that Lauren lives in. And they have a really good wall. And this actually leads to some resentment from the surrounding neighborhoods. And it's a mark of privilege. And she says that they are viewed as having wealth because of it. And she says, she uses the word supposed wealth and privilege. But compared to what she drives through on her bike to get baptized, it is wealth and privilege. She talks about how they purposely wear dirty clothes out and smear themselves with dirt so that people won't think that they are trying to be better than them. Yeah, you have clean clothes and don't have to walk around covered in dirt. That's privilege. That's wealth in comparison. Everything is relative, right? And I think she kind of recognizes that. And also the fact that people like have their own houses still because they're sharing and there's a lot of people crammed into each house, but the houses are still owned by the family that owned them in the first place. These aren't full of squatters. These aren't houses that are abandoned that somebody just took and now there's a bunch of randoms living in there. These are houses that it's the entire remaining family crammed into them. So she's in a much better situation than a lot of people, and lucky for her for many reasons, but mostly for me because of the hyperempathy, because it seems like that would be a surefire way to just wind up dead if she were not behind these walls, which it turns out the walls are not bulletproof, but we'll get to that. All right. So chapter 4, we had a fire today. This is February 1st, 2025 is the date marked here. Oh, here's a victim of God may, through learning adaptation, become a partner of God. A victim of God may, through forethought and planning, become a shaper of God. Or a victim of God may, through short-sightedness and fear, remain God's victim, God's plaything, God's prey. That's pretty, brutal, guys. Yikes. So yeah, we had a fire today. People worry so much about fire, but the little kids will play with it if they can. We were lucky with this fire. Amy Dunn, 3 years old, managed to start it in her family's garage. So, first off, did anybody in the audience ever play with fire in the most literal fashion when they were children? Because I did. I definitely snuck a book of matches into school in 4th grade and lit them in the bathroom and got caught and came home in tears because I thought I was in so much trouble. And it turns out that like they just called my mom and been like, hey, this thing happened. Nothing came of it. It's fine. Just, tell her not to do that again. But of course, it was the first time that Goody Two Shoes me had ever really been in trouble. And I was flipping out by the time I got home. So this little girl, Amy Dunn, this is really rough, guys, because we find out the first thing is Amy knows she did a bad thing. And so she hides and doesn't tell anybody about the fire. They managed to put it out. And the damage isn't as bad as it could have been. But they do lose the garage. There's a lot of water used to put it out, which is expensive. And the grapefruit tree next to the garage and 2 peach trees were half burned, but they might survive. He salvaged some of his garden and carpentry equipment, but not much. The carrot, squash, collard, and potato plants were a trampled mess. Of course, no one called the fire department. No one would take on fire service fees just to save an unoccupied garage. Yeah, so I had forgotten to talk about this last time. But the police and the fire brigades are privatized now. I'm assuming also, the there's got to be other services that are also that I haven't thought of yet. But this is, I know this feels silly to say, but to a degree, this is scarier to me than anything so far. The breakdown of neighborhoods, some people living in extreme poverty and like open illness and sporting horrific injuries like on the street. That's horrific, but it also is like something that I feel like I've seen before in books about the, apocalyptic hellscape, post-society sort of situation. I don't feel like we get into the privatization of industries and businesses, services that are supposed to help us. I don't think that's something that I've seen in things that I personally have read. And so that's the part, and this is the sort of thing that I've always said when I read about like a zombie apocalypse. I'm way more interested in the in-between time when people are still, their society is still functioning, but it's starting to break down and we're doing our best to hold on to the scraps. And what does that look like? And how do we cope? And what does the military, the police, the fire, like what do they do in order to try and maintain society? Those are the things that I find interesting. And usually with those sorts of books, we skip that. We just hear later, well, they tried, but that's why I like World War Z, because they get into that a lot more. But this, in terms of like an apocalypse that's just sort of a result of human beings fucking things up and our planet dying, there is something so, as much as I think the police are a corrupt, mostly racist organization that was founded on white supremacy, slave catching, and, bullshit that persists to this day and results in horrific police brutality and whatnot against people of color and minorities in general. I am still, because it's hard to shake that kind of thing, comforted by the knowledge that the police are there at times. Not often. Like there have definitely been many more moments in my adult life that I've seen the police and been worried because I've learned what they are like. But as a concept, I've been like, well, at the very least, if something bad goes wrong, we can call the police and give them a report and they will like investigate things. And that's somebody in authority taking care of the situation. And do I believe that they can do anything depending on the situation? Whatever. But knowing that it's there, that's the thing. Police and firemen are even more extreme. Fire is the most destructive force that I can think of. Like, it's just, especially nowadays and this summer, it's been like one of the hottest, driest summers that we've had in a really long time. And there are states that have never had to deal with wildfires that are being consumed right now. And the idea that if that happens, you have to pay somebody to come and take care of it. It basically what this is to me is a physical manifestation. And by physical manifestation, I mean like something that more than one person has to deal with. And that is a like on a huge scale, because the other thing is physical also, but I'll get to that. But it's reminding me of American healthcare, and you just hope to God you don't get sick, because if you do, and you are not a wealthy person and you don't have insurance, even if you do have insurance, let's be honest, you're screwed. But if you don't, you can just kind of say goodbye to anything that was comfort or feeling like you had security in your life. If you really get sick, you are on your own. And there may be hospitals that will take care of you to a point, but they will release you if they feel that you can't pay and you've reached a certain point where technically you can get by on your own, even if you shouldn't really be released. There's been a lot of stories of women who've just gone through labor getting like shunted out of the hospital because their insurance covers one night of care, even though those women have gone through hell and are not okay yet. And many other stories besides. And then after getting sick, after losing, whatever the affliction was that may still be affecting you, you go home and now have to continue to cope with that health problem. And now you also have a pile of medical bills. So this is like that. And frankly, getting sick is one of my worst nightmares. That is something that I'm simultaneously terrified of and so angry that this is something in 2018 that we have not figured out yet. And anybody who doesn't really believe in socialized medicine and healthcare, I don't know what to tell you because I think you're nuts, frankly. But I can't imagine if the police and fire services functioned the same way that medical care does. Just forget it. Forget it. Just that's like, I can feel the fear closing in on my heart, even just talking about it. Sorry, there's a couple people in the chat talking about the fire. I think the chat might be a little behind time, compared to where I'm talking. But Melanie says, I started a forest fire on my uncle's land. Nothing in school, though. Oh, damn, Melanie. A forest fire? Shit, girl. Linda says, my best friend and I used white spirit on a barbecue once. It wasn't heating up fast enough for our liking. Nothing more than that for me, though. That's not horrifying, but yeah. The most beautiful to watch, though. Yes. And apparently there's a drug happening that makes watching it even more beautiful to watch. Making me think of Cersei Lannister a little bit here. I'm getting way ahead of myself here. My apologies. I'm going to read to you a little bit about this girl, Amy. What will happen, I wonder, to poor little Amy Dunn? No one cares about her. Her family feeds her and now and then cleans her up, but they don't love her or even like her. Her mother, Tracy, is only a year older than I am. She was 13 when Amy was born. She was 12 when her 27-year-old uncle, who had been raping her for years, managed to make her pregnant. Problem. Uncle Derek was a big, blonde, handsome guy, funny, bright, and well-liked. Tracy is, dull and homely, sulky and dirty-looking. Even when she's clean, she looks splotchy, dirty. Some of her problems might have come from being raped by Uncle Derek for years. Uncle Derek was Tracy's mother's youngest brother, her favorite brother. But when people realized what he had been doing, the neighborhood men got together and suggested he go live somewhere else. People didn't want him around their daughters. Irrational as usual, Tracy's mother blamed Tracy for his exile, for her own embarrassment. Not many girls in the neighborhood have babies before they drag some boy to my father and have him unite them in holy matrimony. But there was no one to marry Tracy, and no money for prenatal care or an abortion. And poor Amy, as she grew, looked more and more like Tracy, scrawny and splotchy with sparse, stringy hair. I don't think she'll ever be pretty. Tracy's maternal instincts didn't kick in, and I doubt that her mother, Christmas Dunn, has any. The Dunn family has a reputation for craziness. There are 16 of them living in the Dunn house, and at least a third are nuts. Amy isn't crazy, though. Not yet. She's neglected and lonely, and like any little kid left on her own too much, she finds ways to amuse herself. I've never seen anyone hit Amy or curse her or anything like that. The Dunns do care what people think of them, but no one pays any attention to her either. She spends most of her time playing alone in the dirt. She also eats the dirt and whatever she finds in it, including bugs. But not long ago, just out of curiosity, I took her to our house, sponged her off, taught her the alphabet, and showed her how to write her name. She loved it. She's got a hungry, able little mind, and she loves attention. So I find this to be really compelling because I feel that neglect is something that doesn't get explored enough in media because it's not an easy thing to understand. Neglect is so subtle, and the damage that it does is so insidious. And it is because of the fact that it is low violence, it isn't treated with the same sort of like energy and emergency that being physically abused is. And obviously, to a degree, I understand that because we need to prioritize and we don't have the resources to be able to save everyone. But neglect is one of those things that it's hard to even put a name to when you're experiencing it. I don't feel like I was neglected. That's not my experience. But I have a couple of very close friends that I think were, and only began to realize it as they became adults because they started to talk to people and realized that like the experience they had was not normal. And when you are neglected, especially in this case, Amy, this little girl, has a humongous family. So it's not like the people aren't around. It's not like, I just have like one parent, but I also have a bunch of brothers and sisters, and there's just not enough energy to go around. That's not what's happening here. They are leaving her alone because they just don't care. And that is so upsetting to me. But it's also, she's the result of a rape and pregnancy at the age of 12. So the fact that her mother doesn't really want anything to do with her is profoundly understandable. And I've come to realize a lot of life, really sad situations where everybody loses, and yet the sad situation and the reason everyone's losing are all understandable. Maybe not good, maybe not excusable, but understandable. And that's hard when you can like completely see somebody's point of view and you're like, yeah, but you need to do better. Yeah, maybe you do. I need to do better too. Guess what? The way that I live my life may be understandable, but not ideal. But this is a little girl, this isn't, I don't go to the gym and watch what I eat enough. This is a little girl. And even if her own mother could not bring herself to care about this girl because of the way that she was conceived, somebody in the family step up, someone do something. And the fact that her mother, not Amy's mother, but Tracy's mom, Christmas is her name, which is nuts to me. Christmas blames Tracy for her favorite brother being exiled is the truest thing. And it's a bummer to read, but like, this is how it goes. And I don't think enough people appreciate this, that when, especially little girls are abused, little boys, there's a combo of things happening when little boys are sexually abused. And it really only happens if little boys are sexually abused by men. If they're abused by women, depending on how little they are, obviously, a lot of times there's a suggestion that they were lucky to be abused because we have a fucked up idea of masculinity and sex. And if little boys are abused by men, there's the homophobia that gets pulled in with it, even though homosexuality and pedophilia have nothing to do with each other. Nevertheless, people conflate these things and find it far more disgusting and get more defensive on behalf of the little boys. When little girls are sexually abused, I cannot tell you, and I'm getting emotional talking about this because this is, again, I'm lucky. This did not happen to me. But there was a thread on Facebook in a pretty closed group of people that all trusted each other. And somebody posted what was the reaction when you came to your parents telling them what was happening to you? And almost all of them And I mean that. By all, I mean 97%. I mean out of hundreds of responses, maybe 3 or 4, the parent believed them and booted the person doing it. That's all. A handful of replies. Otherwise, when it was little girls, well, maybe you shouldn't have been wearing that. Why are you dressing like that around the house? Because you know Uncle so-and-so's coming over. You don't want to act fast. You don't want to, draw attention to yourself this way. And, well, we warned you not to be alone with him. This is the one that killed me. They knew who he was and what he did. And they left their kids alone anyway and left it up to the children to defend themselves. What? And a lot of times the girls were treated as if they had either asked for it, enjoyed it, or at the very least were trying to get attention that just went wrong. That they were attention seeking and they just were too young to understand how that was going to manifest, but maybe you get what you get. And it's just so horrifying to me how ignorant people are and how cold-hearted they are. And the worst ones, excuse me, the worst ones were when it was the significant other of the mom doing it. Because it depended on the age of the little girl, but either she was super defensive of her, boyfriend or new husband or whatever, because of financial stuff. Like she knew that she couldn't get along without him and she felt like her daughter was spoiling this nice situation that she had gotten set up for them. Or she thought that the daughter was jealous and trying to steal the guy away from her. This is just one of those things that I just can't wrap my mind around, living and believing that sort of thing and not defending your own child. Not your child comes to you and tells you that this thing is happening. And this is all, these examples that I'm giving are all examples when the parent believed the little girl at all. Because believing her, that was a kind of 50-50 thing. A lot of times they just say she was lying and trying to sow discord. Well, we know that you just don't like him, so now you're just saying whatever you want to try and get him out of here. Maybe she doesn't like him because he's a fucking abuser. But this is what would happen if they believed what the girl was saying. So this whole thing is just, I'm barely even past the first 3 pages of this chapter, guys. I'm sorry. I'm so focused on this, but it's really a lot that gets dropped into just a few paragraphs, So yeah, there is Linda's saying easier to think the girl is lying than face you're with a monster. I think that's a big part of it too, is that people don't want to believe that they could have been hoodwinked or that they could be that blind to it. That poor judge of character. I mean, it's a really selfish position to take. Like, I couldn't be fooled, so you must be lying. Kids don't lie about that shit. Guys, why would they? God. All right. So let's see. Going on. She asks Corey if Amy could start school. And Corey said, yes, if I take charge of her. Which Lauren's willing to do, but she's irritated by it because she feels like she's been taking care of kids since forever. And I think that's just, understandable. And I kind of like that Lauren is simultaneously protective of Amy and sees her potential and is a bit maternal feeling towards her, but also doesn't appreciate being saddled with this responsibility. I like that both of those things are happening. It just adds a nice layer of complexity here. So then we meet Wardell Parish and Rosalie Payne, who are cousins of Mrs. Sims and who inherited her house. Mrs. Sims, if y'all remember, was the old lady who lived alone in a house, which is unheard of. And once she was robbed and raped and got a little bit paranoid after that. And then her only son, his wife, and like all 5 of their kids were killed in a house fire. And she killed herself a couple days later. Mrs. Sims believed in hell for suicides. So the fact that she killed herself is something that really bothers Lauren. Like, she knew, or I say knew in quotes, she knew she was going to hell and did it anyway because that was preferable to being alive anymore, which is that's a real bad place to be. And there's a lot of people out there who have believed that and done it anyway, and I just can't imagine. So Wardell and Rosalie are coming to take her house, and Lauren goes on to say, like, very carefully, that the house has been preserved. They haven't taken any furniture, but they did take back the things that they had given to Mrs. Sims after she was robbed, and they take the food that's in the house because it's going to rot. And, you know, it's been a little while since her house was... She had been dead several days by the time they found her. So taking the food was a smart idea. And yet, when this couple shows up, Parish and Payne, so good. They're both small, rust brown, sour looking people like Mrs. Sims. And she says they're not only brother and sister, but twins. Maybe that helps them get along with each other. They damn sure won't get along with anyone else. And she talks about how the 2 of them are accusing everyone of having stolen things from the house. And her father manages to keep his temper, although he's obviously angry, because they're bringing up things like jewelry and stuff that, you know, is obviously, if she had still had it, it would have been stolen by the people who robbed the house the first time. That shit wouldn't still be around. But they don't really believe that, even though they could go to the police and look at the police report that, you know, their cousin had filed. She would know what was missing. And yet they don't want to do that. They would rather blame everybody in the neighborhood and say that they probably took something. And then when he says we help each other and we don't steal, Parish says, I wouldn't expect you to say you did, which is just so, like, such a snotty remark. Well, of course you'd say you don't steal, you fucking thief. And when he says, check with police about the jewelry, she says, well, yes, I know, but nothing, bitch, shut up. Ugh, I hate them. We're not very social, Parish said. We mind our own business. Yeah. Good. Bye. Man. She's written some good characters here, though. Like, they feel real. It doesn't feel, you know, I've met this person, but it's really hard to read. Like, I just get so mad. I didn't like them when I heard them. I liked them even less when I met them. They look at us as though we smell, and they don't. Of course, it doesn't matter whether I like them or not. There are other people in the neighborhood whom I don't like, but I don't trust the Payne parishes. The kids seem all right, but the adults, I wouldn't want to have to depend on them, not even for little things. Payne and Parish, what perfect names they have. So then, February 22nd, they run into a pack of feral dogs. They have gone out to do some shooting, some target practice. And I found this really interesting because I was wondering when race was going to be brought up. The Garfields and the Baders are white and the rest of us are black. That can be dangerous these days. On the street, people are expected to fear and hate everyone but their own kind. But with all of us armed and watchful, people stared, but they let us alone. Our neighborhood is too small for us to play those kinds of games. So I like that this is addressed. The issue of race, like when society breaks down, as unfortunate as it may be, retreating to be with your own race does seem like a rather human quality. I would love to think that we would get past that because we want to survive. And maybe once we started to get into a sincere thinning of the population because of apocalyptic circumstances, we would all come together and it would be, you know, us all working as one, no matter what the race. But when you're in this sort of situation, which is very different, there's too many people, there's not enough room, there's not enough housing, there's not enough food or water. Yeah, that feels right. We're having that happen right before our eyes at this very moment. And I like that they are only able to keep everyone from hassling them about it because of the fact that they're armed. Like, yikes. So they go out to do their target practice. And this is when we like really get a little look at the different families. The Talcotts got into an argument first with each other, then with the Mosses. The Mosses are always blaming other people for whatever they do wrong, so they tend to have disputes outstanding with most of us. Peter Moss is the worst because he's always trying to be like his father, and his father is a total shit. His father has 3 wives. So then we get into this whole thing with the father had like a middle-class job and has some, you know, some money and some resources. And he had 1 wife and then brought home another woman once things started to get really bad. And his wife was not in a position to live on her own and so accepted the second wife. And then he brought home another one. And she'd already set the precedent of like accepting it that time. And so now he like feels free to have as many wives as he wants. And apparently this is not an unusual thing. So yeah, Richard Moss has put together his own religion, a combination of the Old Testament and historical West African practices. He claims that God wants men to be patriarchs, rulers, and protectors of women, and fathers of as many children as possible. Some middle-class men prove their men by having a lot of wives in temporary or permanent relationships. Some upper-class men prove their men by having 1 wife and a lot of beautiful, disposable young servant girls. When the girls get pregnant, if their rich employers won't protect them, then the employers' wives throw them out to starve. Yikes. Awesome. Good to know that patriarchy's alive and well still. Great. So yeah, they go to practice with the guns, and Lauren talks about, you know, whether or not she feels pain when she shoots because of the hyper empathy. She can feel as she puts it, a big, soft, strange ghost blow, like getting hit with a huge ball of air, but with no coolness and no feeling of wind. The blow, though still soft, was a little harder with squirrels and sometimes rats than with birds. And she talks about how this isn't just like we eat what we shoot, like maybe so, but also what we shoot eats what we eat. So we need to kill them in order to keep our crops safe and everything. And this is all encouraged by her father, like paying so much attention to guns and shooting. He's a big proponent of this. So they wind up going to the this like abandoned area to practice like they always do. And she sees a dog, and this is an unusual thing. Dogs are not common if you're not rich because they eat meat, and nobody has meat to spare to feed dogs anymore unless they're wealthy and have something valuable to protect. So seeing this dog is like a really big deal. And the dog disappears, and then another one appears in another spot, and they don't come after them, but it makes everybody nervous for them to even be around. Her father goes and checks over this like hillock, and then it's like, all right, we're leaving. And we find out later that behind that hill were several corpses, and it was a woman and a child and a couple of, a woman, a little boy of about 4 years, and a just born infant, all partly eaten. So the scenario that I'm thinking is that the woman was with her son and was pregnant, began to give birth, and maybe the smell of the birth attracted the dogs, like sharks, and they came and attacked them while they were like super vulnerable, and they all died, which is like the most fucking awful thing I've ever heard. So that's cool. And as they head home, another dog, like, kind of it doesn't attack them, but it approaches them. And her father shoots it a couple times, but it isn't dead. And as Lauren's walking by it, she can really feel the pain of this animal, and winds up shooting it in the head in order to put it out of its misery so that she doesn't have to feel it anymore. Like, she almost passes out. That's how close she is because of how much she feels. So apparently the different animals have very different effects on her. If it's birds and rats and squirrels are just like this soft blow, but she can really feel this dog's pain. I'm wondering what that's about. If it's like the actual complexity of the brain of the animal, or if it's like her personal connection to it, or what. I don't know why she'd be connected to this dog, but so yeah, she shoots it again, and it seems like her father kind of knows why she did that, but nobody else is aware of what her condition is. So they don't know why she did this. And just kind of put it down to her being a little bit of a badass is what it seems like everybody believes. And she says, I walked, then rode in a daze, still not quite free of the dog I had killed. I had felt it die, yet I had not died. I had felt its pain as though it were a human being. I had felt its life flare and go out, and I was still alive. Pow. So that's important, because she's been thinking lately about defending herself with the gun, and if she can feel what other people are feeling, if she shoots somebody and kills them, will she die? And, that's not something you find out until it's too late. So now she knows, I think, based on this dog and feeling it as if it were a human being, it didn't die. So probably if she kills a person, she won't die. Chapter 5, we have Sunday, March 2nd, and they get a storm. There's water for a couple days, this storm. It's a cold winter storm. And people like at church leave and go put out buckets and barrels and tubs and pots to catch all of the water, free, clean water coming from the sky. I like that this is free, clean water too, because I was afraid that it was going to be like, oh, it rained, but it was acid rain. So it pretty much killed everything and it wasn't good for drinking and yada, yada, yada. And for all I know, it is acid rain. But these people, beggars can't be choosers. So what are you going to do? So no thunder today, though there was some last night, steady drizzle and occasional heavy showers all day. And then we get Amy Dunn is dead. 3 years old, unloved, and dead. That doesn't seem reasonable or even possible. So this little girl was shot through the wall. Everybody thinks it was an accident, that either they were shooting at the wall out of frustration and anger because of their, as she put it, supposed wealth and privilege, or they were shooting at somebody else and it went wild and it went through. And the family, despite the fact that they never really seemed to care about Amy, she says that her mother seems really upset. I wonder if her mother is relieved. She doesn't look relieved. She never liked Amy, but now she cries, and I don't think she's faking. The family has spent money it could not afford to get the police involved to try and find the killer. I suspect the only good this will do will be to chase away the people who live on the sidewalks and streets nearest to our wall. The street poor will be back, and they won't love us for sicking the cops on them. It's illegal to camp out on the street the way they do, the way they must, so the cops knock them around, rob them if they have anything worth stealing, then order them away or jail them. Sounds right. Yeah, guys, if you guys don't know about, search and seizure by police, they're basically allowed to just take whatever they want and say it's because of an investigation, and they never even have to, fill out paperwork half the time, and they can just keep it. And it's really fucked up. On Saturday, Dad will preach at Amy's funeral. I wish I didn't have to be there. So then she starts talking with her friend Joanne. And this is such a frustrating thing. Lauren and Joanne are not on the same page. Joanne is apparently Lauren's only real friend. And so Lauren thinks to herself, I haven't confided in anybody and I'm going to have to. So I may as well confide in Joanne, and tells her about how she is positive that they aren't going to be able to continue living in this community for that much longer. Things are breaking down and it's going to get worse. And even though the adults keep saying the new president is going to be able to fix things, she doesn't believe it. Lauren doesn't believe it. And she has books about native California. Oh, she says California here. Right. So they do live in California. Native edible plants, gun maintenance and shooting and whatever. And then also, dealing with medical emergencies. And these books are what she's using to try and prepare herself. And she tries to explain this to Joanne and tell her that, like, we need to be ready, and we should also be like creating go bags, basically, filled with stuff that we can grab really quickly and that will help us out, food or tools or whatever. And she just doesn't buy it. Joanne doesn't buy it. And there's many reasons why that could be true. Does she not buy it because she doesn't want to? Does she not buy it because she really just doesn't understand the way that Lauren understands? I feel like Lauren's hyper empathy gives her an edge in that arena that she doesn't even quite appreciate herself. Knowing what people are going through in a very particular way is going to make you more sensitive to their plight and what could potentially happen to you. So, the fact that Joanne isn't as worried as she should be because she doesn't have the same kind of empathy, that feels like a metaphor for things today, does it not? So this whole chapter is basically Lauren trying to convince Joanne that she needs this information and she needs to be prepared. And there's this really annoying thing that she says, even some fiction might be useful. And she gave me a sidelong glance. I'll bet, she said. Oh, okay. So she gives her one of the plant books. And I just think that's like, and it's understandable, but the fact that Joanne clearly doesn't agree with her or believe her, and she still gives her one of the books, I'm like, oh, girl, just keep that shit. It's not going to do any good. I said, I don't believe you. I don't care. She looked at the book, ran her hands over the black cloth and cardboard binding. So we learned to eat grass and live in the bushes, she muttered. We learned to survive, I said. It's a good book. Take care of it. You know how my father is about books. Well, chapter 6 starts off with, Joanne told. She told her mother, who told her father, who told my father, who had one of those serious talks with me. I hate Joanne. Like, maybe that's not fair, but guess what? That's how it is. I don't have a lot of tolerance for people who are fools and who don't think things through and like get serious about understanding things. It's one thing if you're just flat out not as smart as other people. That's a whole different situation. That's not being a fool. A fool is somebody who has everything at their fingertips to educate themselves and doesn't do it. And then makes stupid decisions because they're ignorant. And Joanne is that kind of person. So, yeah. This is, as she puts it, Joanne always seemed so sensible. Did she think getting me into trouble would make the danger go away? No, that's not it. This is just more denial. A dumb little game of, if you don't talk about bad things, maybe they won't happen. Idiot, I'll never be able to tell her anything important again. What if I'd been more open? What if I talked religion with her? I'd wanted to. How will I ever be able to talk to anyone about that? Yeah, Lauren, I really feel for her in this moment because she is realizing that she's really alone. And that's a hard place to be. I've been there, knowing that nobody really is getting what I'm like. And not that there's nobody out there, but in my community that I've got going on right now, I don't really have anybody that's on the same page as me. And what now? I just have to sit here and think this stuff to myself? That sucks. And so she turns it from Lauren's learning how to take care of herself to she's talking about running away because outsiders are going to riot and tear down the walls and kill us all. And she's like, I had said some of that, but I hadn't just let the bad predictions stand alone. And that's, I think, the important thing is you can say things like that and not treat it as well, I think this is what's going to happen. It's this good thing we've got going can't last forever. If it does, it'll be a big surprise and that'll be great, but likely won't. And what's the harm in knowing more? What's the harm in educating ourselves? So, yeah, her dad comes to her room and said, that the way that this whole thing, do you think our world is coming to an end? And with no warning at all, I almost started crying. I had all I could do to hold it back. What I thought was, no, I think your world is coming to an end, and maybe you with it. That was terrible. I hadn't thought about it in such a personal way before. I turned and looked out a window until I felt calmer. When I faced him again, I said, yes, don't you? He frowned. I don't think he expected me to say that. You're 15, he said. You don't really understand what's going on here. The problems we have now have been building since long before you were born. I know. He was still frowning. I wondered what he wanted me to say. What were you doing then? He asked. Why did you say those things to Joanne? I decided to go on telling the truth for as long as I could. I hate to lie to him. What I said was true, I insisted. You don't have to say everything you think you know. Haven't you figured that out yet? Joanne and I were friends, I said. I thought I could talk to her. He shook his head. These things frighten people. It's best not to talk about them. But, Dad, that's like ignoring a fire in the living room because we're all in the kitchen, and besides, house fires are too scary to talk about. Don't warn Joanne or any of your other friends, he said. Not now. I know you think you're right, but you're not doing anyone any good. You're just panicking people. And this is when she asks if he gave her back, she gave back the book about plants. And he says, yeah, I'll have to get it back. So apparently they didn't, which that was part of my worry. And he says, you wouldn't have the acorn bread you like so much without that one, not to mention a few other things we take for granted. And he says that most of the people in the country don't eat acorns. They have no tradition of eating them. They don't know how to prepare them, and they find the idea of eating them disgusting. Some of our neighbors wanted to cut down all the big live oak trees and plant something useful. You wouldn't believe the time I had changing their mind. And she asks, what did people eat before? And I love these little moments where we get reminded that she didn't grow up in our world and then witness the changes. She grew up in this world. She's only 15 and it's the year 2025, right? So in this universe, she's born in 2010. So she'd be 8 years old now. And as far as she was concerned when she was born, shit was already garbage. We are already in chaos at this point. And when she asks, he tells her bread made of other grains, corn, rye, oats, things like that. She says, too expensive. Didn't used to be. You get that book back from Joanne. And he asks if she was trying to talk her into running away. And she's like, no. And she has to convince him that that wasn't it. And finally believes her in the end. But he's still upset that she's bringing this up to people. She says, you don't make decisions for this community. Oh, hell, if I could just find a balance between holding back too much and poaching. Yes, sir. So then he asks her, tell me exactly what you told Joanne, all of it. I was careful to keep my voice flat and passionless, but I didn't leave anything out. I wanted him to know, to understand what I believed, the non-religious part of it, anyway. When I finished, I stopped and waited. He seemed to expect me to say more. He just sat there for a while and stared at me. I couldn't tell what he felt. Other people never could if he didn't want them to, but I've been able to most of the time. Now I felt shut out, and there was nothing I could do about that. At last, he let out his breath as if he had been holding it. Don't talk about this anymore, he said in a voice that didn't invite argument. I looked back at him, not wanting to give a promise that would be a lie. Lauren, Dad, I want your promise that you won't talk about this anymore. What to say? I wouldn't promise. I couldn't. We could make earthquake packs, I suggested. Emergency kits we can grab. And she starts saying all of this stuff, and he says, I want your promise. And she's like, why though? You know that I'm right. And yeah, when he says, you don't have any idea what you're doing. It's better to teach people than to scare them. If you scare them and nothing happens, they lose their fear and you lose some of your authority with them. It's harder to scare them a second time, harder to teach them, harder to win back their trust. Best to begin by teaching. It's interesting you chose to begin your efforts with a book you lent to Joanne. Did you ever think of teaching from that book? Teaching my kindergartners? Why not? Get them started on the right foot. You could even put together a class for the older kids and adults. I love this. I love this because this is one of those moments where, as a teenager, we do think we know everything. And in some ways, we do, in a very small way. Our ideals, I feel like, as teenagers, are in some of the better places that they are going to be in our lives, where we haven't been broken down and busted up by this, like, world of ours and started to believe that nothing can get better. You know, like, we haven't reached the point that I have, say, as a 33-year-old, where I'm starting to be like, is anything good ever going to happen? And so in that respect, when she's saying, like, I'm right and this may happen and we need to be prepared, she is right and he knows that. But as an adult, he understands human nature and he understands that there is a way to handle this that will do these people more good than the way that she is doing it. And it still accomplishes the same thing. She wants people to get educated. She wants people to be prepared. So does he. But he's just handling it in a totally different way. And when she says, maybe it's time to look down, time to look for some hands and footholds before we get pushed into the abyss. And he says that's why we have target practice every week and laser wire and our emergency bell. Your idea for emergency packs is a good one. Some people already have them for earthquakes. Some will assemble them if I suggest it. There are always going to be people that won't do anything. And when he talks about the time frame, she says that it's not fast enough. And he's like, guess what? It's going to have to be. And I really like his point about you can scare people once, but if nothing happens, you lose authority over them. A really good point. People need a leader. That's just how people are. And if they don't believe in you anymore, then somebody else who may not have the like best of intentions will step in and take your spot. And if something does come up and you are sure this time that it really will lead to something, good luck getting them to listen to you now. Somebody else has already taken your spot and you've already proven once that you were wrong and maybe can't be trusted. So yeah, I just really like the whole way that this conversation goes and how her dad actually listens to her. Her dad is, I think, just shocked that she has such clarity about the world. I don't think he appreciates I think it's the same thing in some ways as Lauren, that he doesn't understand how much her hyper empathy has kept her eyes wide open about what's going on. And she says he had offered me a lot, all I would get, I suspected. Okay, Dad, I promise. I'll try not to scare anyone else. I just hope things hold together long enough for us to do it your way. And he's like, yeah, all right, fair. So then he wants her to come out back and says, there are things buried in the yard in sealed containers. It's time for you to know what they are, just in case. So this is this whole thing. Joanne, when like remainder of this chapter, I'm going long here. This is a long episode. I'm sorry, guys. There's just so much packed into all of these chapters. Joanne comes up to her and asks if they're still friends. And Lauren can't really be like, yes. So she says, not enemies anyway, but I do want his book back. And she says, well, my mom took it. And she's like, yeah, I don't care. He wants his book. But it's just one of those moments. Like, I feel bad when somebody that, you know, yes, she's a fool. Joanne's a fool. But she didn't mean harm. She really didn't. I don't think. Maybe I'm giving her too much credit. And it's hard to watch, like, what could have been a friendship and a partnership kind of dissolve before it gets started, you know? Garden thieves got in last night. They stripped citrus trees of fruit in the Sioux yard and the Talcott yard. In the process, they trampled what was left of winter gardens and much of the spring planting. Dad says we have to set up a regular watch. He tries to call a neighborhood association meeting for tonight, but it's a work night for some people, including Gary Sue, who sleeps over at his job whenever he has to report in person. So apparently people climbing over the walls and stealing things is just not something that has happened before. And this feels like it's really lending credence to everything Lauren has been saying. The fact that they didn't already have a neighborhood watch when they have a wall, frankly, surprises me. I assumed that this was going on, but evidently not. And because people go to bed so soon after dark to save on electricity, they need to have something to make sure that people are aware they're not robbers. The first patrol walking through looking in all to the backyards will get people used to the idea of watchers while they were still awake enough to understand. The sight of you will remind them there will be watchers all through the night, and we don't want any of them mistaking you for thieves. So, yeah, this whole thing is an organized effort that I really expected to already be in place and that we just hadn't heard about it. And yeah, it's just one of those things that, I guess hindsight is 20/20, but I just think I had this in mind because of The Walking Dead. And when they live in a walled area, there are, watches just to make sure that the walls aren't caved in by walkers and various things like that. And the laser wire on top, the fact that people can get over that stuff, is a bummer. So what will you do if you catch a thief? Corey asked my father. I eavesdrop. She says, we'll chase him off, I hope, Dad said. We've agreed to that. We'll give him a good scare and let him know there are easier ways to get $1. And when the kid says $1, or when he says $1, the kid's like, wait, what? And he says, yeah, they didn't steal that food because they were hungry. They stripped those trees, took everything they could. They stole for money. They're not desperate, just greedy and dangerous. We might be able to scare them into looking for easier pickings. If you can't scare them, will you shoot them? Yes, he said. And she just is shocked by this. And I love Lauren thinking to herself, what planet do people like that live on? I feel like this all the time. People are just in such denial about things. And it's right in front of your face. How do you not see this? It's infuriating. Couldn't we just call the police? For what? We can't afford their fees. And anyway, they're not interested until after a crime has been committed. Even then, if you call them, they won't show up for hours, maybe not 2 or 3 days. I know. What are you saying then? You want the kids to go hungry? You want thieves coming into the house once they've stripped the gardens? But they haven't done that. Of course they have. Mrs. Sims was only their latest victim. She lived alone. We always said she shouldn't do that. You want to trust them not to hurt you or the kids just because there are 7 of us? This whole argument is so frustrating. Oh, God. I just can't. The fact that she's a grown woman, too. The way that she's talking to some degree sounds like a child. And I had to remind myself, this is his wife. This is a grown woman who's telling him, thou shalt not kill. And he quotes back at her Nehemiah 4, verse 14, which when Lauren goes and looks it up, I looked and rose up and said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your houses. I like that Lauren notices that Dad had the verse ready and Corey recognized it. So they've probably had this conversation before. So then we have the organizing of the neighborhood watch, all of this stuff. Our thieves paid us another visit last night. Maybe they weren't the same ones, but their intentions were the same, to take away what someone else had sweated to grow and very much needs. So they were after the rabbits this time, Richard Moss's rabbits. Those rabbits are the neighborhood's only livestock, except for some chickens the Cruz and Montoya families tried to raise a few years ago. Those were stolen as soon as they were old enough to make noise and let outsiders know they were there. I really like that detail. If you haven't lived with chickens, it's impossible to get across how fucking loud they can be. It's stupid. Roosters, of course, their crows are meant to carry. That's the whole thing. But even regular chickens can be hella loud. So I like that it's sort of advertised, and the Mosses had been selling to us all along meat, hides, fertilizer, everything except live rabbits. Those he hoarded as breeding stock. But now, stubborn Arrogant and greedy, he had decided he could earn more if he peddled his merchandise outside. So now the word is out on the street about the damned rabbits. This fucking guy, am I right? This is the guy with a bunch of wives, too, I'm pretty sure. So, yeah, the Moss Rabbit House is a converted 3-car garage. And nobody has cars anymore, so nobody uses garages. And I like that Lauren's baffled by the fact that anybody had enough gas-fueled cars to justify a 3-car garage. Even, today, 3-car garages are not a super common thing. Owen's grandparents are about to move into a house that has 3 garages, and it's just nuts to me. That's a lot. It's a lot of space. And so, yeah, the Moss kids, apparently do not enjoy taking care of these rabbits, but it's what's keeping them afloat in some ways at this point. The 2 thieves had managed to stuff 13 rabbits into canvas sacks by the time our watchers spotted them. And they followed the plan that the group of watchers had put together. They fired their guns into the air 2 or 3 times each, at the same time blowing their whistles full blast. They kept to cover, but inside the Moss house, someone woke up and turned on the rabbit house lights. That could have been a lethal mistake for the watchers, but they were hidden behind pomegranate bushes. The 2 thieves ran like rabbits, abandoning sacks, rabbits, pry bars, a long coil of rope, wire cutters, and even an excellent long aluminum ladder. They scrambled up that ladder and over the wall in seconds. Our wall is 3 meters high and topped off with pieces of broken glass as well as the usual barbed wire and all but invisible laser wire. All the wire had been cut in spite of our efforts. What a pity we couldn't afford to electrify it or set other traps, but at least the glass had gotten one of them. We found a broad stream of dried blood down the inside of the wall this morning. We also found a Glock 19 pistol where one of the thieves had dropped it. So that's alarming. They had not expected the thieves to be armed at all, but they were. And she doesn't specifically say if they were loaded, but she does say there could have been a gun battle, so I'm going to assume it was loaded. And I just think it's really, I'm hoping that this little moment is enough to make the thieves decide, as her father put it, to go for easier pickings, because maybe they just weren't expecting a watch that's organized and set up. Yeah, this whole thing is just indicative of a larger problem, which Corey knows, but is still not able to cope with. And she just yells, "We can't live this way." "We do live this way," Dad said. There was no anger in his voice, no emotional response at all. There was nothing. Maybe weariness, sadness. I'd never heard him sound so tired, almost beaten. And yet he'd won. His idea had beaten off a pair of armed thieves without ever having to hurt anyone. If the thieves had hurt themselves, that was their problem. Of course they would come back, or others would come. That would happen no matter what. And Corey was right. The next thieves might not lose their guns and run away. Yeah, the inevitability with, of course they would come back or others would come. I'm kind of being like Corey here in saying, I really hope not. I don't want that to be true. I just want them to be like, oh shit, they almost fired guns on us. We better just not go back there. There's a wall and laser wire and regular wire. Yeah. This whole conversation that he has with her is so frustrating because Corey just doesn't want to face the truth. And even asks well, what do we do if you die? And girl, what do you think he's trying to prep you for? Why do you think that he's giving her all of his daughter, this gun training so that you guys aren't completely helpless without him, Yeah, there has to be more that we can do, a better destiny we can shape, another place, another way, something. And that's the end of chapter 6. So I when I said I started this episode and I was I could use a little hope. That's what I meant is there has to be another way, but it doesn't feel like that. I'm feeling the way that the characters are feeling. And this book has just been a bummer, guys, so far. It's fascinating and well written, well drawn characters, and I like it. Don't get me wrong, but it's a bummer. And I'm not really sure what to expect here. Like, I don't expect the world to fix itself. That's not this kind of book. I don't expect them to find some sort of like mecca that they can move into that's all green and protected and whatever. That's not this kind of book. I don't really know what to expect. Is it just a slice of life in this community, and that's what it's going to be from beginning to end? Just how we live our lives? I'm just curious what the plot of the book is, if there is one exactly. Like, because it can't just be fighting robbers. There's got to be a bigger overarching thing happening. But as of right now, so maybe it is just a slice of, I don't know. I'm curious what you guys all think if you're following along and you haven't continued reading it either. But yeah, I'm looking forward to, Danique, thank you for commissioning this. And Danique says that she's going to be commissioning another one. So I'm looking forward to that, to getting to read more of this. And, this is a compelling story. It really is. I'm just really not sure. This isn't something that I feel like I can make predictions about. There are some plots where I'm like, okay, well, they're clearly heading in this direction, so this will have to happen. That's not how this is working. There's no direction it's clearly heading in to me. So, I really have no idea what's up next. So I think that's about it. I think, Linda had to leave the chat, but Melanie's still here. Melanie, I don't know if you have any questions, but I don't think you've read this, right? So I don't think you have any questions because you aren't a spoiled one, are you? But I feel like a little bit alarmed by how much parts of what is being talked about here feels like it could be easily mirroring what we're going through as a country right now. It's upsetting. Keep sneezing this morning. I don't know what's up with me. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you to Melanie and to Linda for coming. Thank you again to Danique for commissioning this. Hope that you guys are enjoying. And I will see you again soon with, I think, probably another 3 chapters. I can't believe there's so much to talk about in 3 chapters, but there is, man. These would be really long podcast episodes if I had a partner going back and forth just by myself and just talking about the exact things I want to talk about. They're still over an hour long. So, yeah, wow. I'm just excited. Thank you very much again, Danique, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.